Interesting story in this month's National Review, November 28th issue, 2011. It's what is constitutional conservatism. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go live to the House floor for morning speeches.
Appoint the Honorable Kenny Marchant to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to an order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. At this time, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
I asked you to have consent to Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's Reuters report, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton Wednesday urged claimants to the South China Sea not to resort to intimidation to push their cause in a potentially oil-rich waters, and indirect reference to China ahead of regional leaders summit. Why are we concerned about crude oil in dangerous places of the world? Is because we do not have North American energy security, hence the whole Keystone XL pipeline debate. And we have good news on that front 2 days ago, as in Lincoln, Nebraska, another Reuters article says Nebraska and TransCanada Corporation agreed on Monday to find a new route for the stalled Keystone XL pipeline that would steer clear of environmentally sensitive lands in the state. Why is that important? Energy security, expediting the permitting process, 20,000 new jobs immediately, private capital, Caterpillar mining trucks, refinery, Marathon Oil Refinery. If you live in the Midwest states of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, this oil goes directly to refineries in that, which decreases our reliance on imported crude oil and makes us safe and secure and creates jobs. Keystone XL is a no-brainer. This administration needs to get off the dime and move this process, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. At this time, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Last December, an item caught my eye in the Harper's Index: the rank of baked goods, pizza, and soda as sources of calories for American children. Drum roll, please. Number 1, number 2, number 3. That's our children get most of their calories first from baked goods, then from pizza, then from soda. No wonder we have a national epidemic of obesity for our children, with lifetime health care consequences, starting with diabetes and then heart disease. It's why the military is concerned that 1 in 4, only 1 in 4, young people qualifies for military service, with obesity being a major factor in that disqualification. I salute First Lady Michelle Obama in her efforts to spotlight healthy eating, to help families give their children more nutritious choices. But we should start with what we're feeding 31.6 million children in our schools. The administration has taken some small but important steps with the federal partnership of this largest food program in the country to refine what the standards are for delivering this important service to our children. Well, the battle has taken a new turn, where Congress is poised to intervene to make sure that pizza continues to count as a vegetable and that we protect more French fries on the tray. Well, overturning this simple common sense adjustment for rules, which food nutrition experts and child advocates strongly support, is going to be buried in the agriculture appropriation bill coming forward. The people who defend inflicting this on our children cite issues of cost, waste, and nutrition. Well, you don't need calorie-laden pizza crust to deliver nutrients. And waste is not a product of giving people healthy choices. I invite anybody to come with me visit Abernathy School in Portland, Oregon, where parents, students, and faculty have combined to have an innovative food program where kids grow food themselves, they prepare it, they study it, they're healthier and happier. Come to the University of Portland, where Bon Appetit, an innovative food service supplier, has, by providing more choices and healthier choices, has cut waste 70%. But the cost argument is the most bogus. We're talking arguably about perhaps as much as 14 cents a meal, less than $1.4 billion for a year. That is less than Congress has decided that it will pay Brazilian cotton farmers because we don't have the gumption to end illegal cotton subsidies to American farmers. We could produce $25 to $30 billion in savings from direct payments, usually to large agribusiness entrants. Or if we stop the obscene process of giving more to crop insurance agents than to farmers, reform crop insurance, we could yield another $8 to $12 billion. This is entirely within our capacity. If the House goes along with this travesty, shame on us. The need to protect our children's health has never been clearer. The costs have never been manageable. Indeed, this will more than pay for itself in lifetime costs of health, necessary health damage, and shortened lives. The ketchup as vegetable debacle of the Reagan era will look tame and sane by comparison. I strongly urge the House to reject this ill-advised initiative.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of November 14, 2011, the United States national debt is $14.973 trillion, according to the Department of the Treasury. With pending security auctions this month, it is inevitable that the national debt will reach the unprecedented level of $15 trillion in the coming weeks. When the national debt reaches $15 trillion, it means that U.S. debt to GDP ratio will reach 99.7% of our debt. And this is $47,900 for every living American. Since President Obama took office in 2009, the debt has gone up by $4.3 trillion. In the last 50 years, the federal government has only managed to balance its budget 5 times, most recently with President Clinton, a Democrat, and Republican control of the United States House of Representatives and of the Senate. Washington now borrows approximately 40% of every dollar it spends. Foreign investors hold half of our nation's debt, not only from China, but from Japan, Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, and other places as well. Admiral Mullen, the recently retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has rightly called the national debt the biggest threat to our national security. While we have made significant strides in reducing the cost of government over the past few months, much more is needed to be done. The primary focus of this Congress and our new leadership has been to restore fiscal sanity and fiscal restraint to the federal government. We must remember that the money in the Treasury is not our money, but it is the people's money, and we are charged with being good stewards of that money. There's only one way to ensure that future Congresses and presidents, regardless of party, are unable to return to the reckless, out-of-control spending of the past. That is to pass a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. This week, Congress will vote on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution for the first time in 16 years. In 1995, following passage by the House of Representatives, the United States Senate came within one vote of sending a version of the balanced budget amendment to the states for ratification. Since then, our total national debt has almost tripled. Today's proposal is nearly identical with the one that passed the House of Representatives with 72 Democratic votes in 1995. Amending our Constitution should not be taken lightly. I will support the balanced budget amendment because I believe it is the right thing to do to help get our nation's fiscal house in order. I would have preferred that the balanced budget amendment include a spending cap. But we need Democratic members to achieve the necessary two-thirds majority required for a constitutional amendment to be sent to the states for ratification. That is why the amendment we will be considering almost mirrors the 1995 text. Before coming to Congress, I served in the New Jersey State Legislature, where I successfully sought reforms to ensure that our state government was responsible with the people's money. In 2008, the people of New Jersey passed my state constitutional amendment to require voter approval for or issuance of state borrowing. I am proud to be able to do my part here in Washington as well. Most states, including New Jersey, are required to balance their state budgets. If the federal government continues to spend what it does not have, the balanced budget amendment would provide a much-needed safeguard to restrict future spending. As someone who tries to be a student of American history, I know that a balanced budget amendment is not a new idea. Thomas Jefferson was a strong proponent of the idea. He said, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to the Constitution. I would be willing to depend on that alone for the reduction of the administration of our government." He was referring to a balanced budget amendment. Those were wise words when spoken, and they are wise words today. Passing a balanced budget amendment would also help move us closer to much-needed economic certainty that our nation desperately needs to boost the economy and help create jobs. When I was a boy and a young man, the fundamental issue confronting the nation was the threat of the Soviet Union and international communism. The focus of evil in the modern world, as President Reagan said. The fundamental issue confronting the nation in the 21st century is fiscal responsibility. Will our children live in a diminished America? Will the promise of America that each generation does better than the generation before it continue to exist? Will we continue to lead the world, or will leadership pass to China or India or to some other place? This is the great issue confronting the people of the United States, and it's the great issue confronting us here in Congress. Let us get our fiscal house in order. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise with a heavy heart to honor and recognize Marine Lance Corporal Nicholas Daniels. Lance Corporal Daniels of Elmwood Park, Illinois, was tragically killed November 5th at the age of 25 while on patrol in the Helmand province of Afghanistan. I want to pass on my deepest condolences to Nick's family and those who knew him, and share with them the thanks of a grateful nation. Nick attended Elmwood Elementary School and graduated from St. Patrick High School in 2004, where he was an all-conference linebacker in football. Mr. Daniels, after going back to St. Pat's to coach football, joined the Marines in 2010 to help achieve his goal of one day becoming a police officer. Nick was well known and respected throughout the St. Pat's community. He was a very funny, light-hearted person who would do anything for those around him. Not only was Nick a dedicated coach, but most importantly to him, he was a loving son and grandson, an incredible mentor to his younger sister and brothers, and a loving and devoted fiancé. I've been told that Nick poured his heart into everything he did and always wanted to make sure his friends and family were taken care of. A decorated Marine receiving multiple citations and a role model in his community, Nicholas Daniels was and will remain a shining example of the best this country has to offer. We can never repay Nick or his family for what they have given to this country, but his sacrifice will forever be remembered by those he fought to protect. As I thought about what to say today, I realized the inadequacy of words in any such effort. I was reminded that this feeling was shared by an American president who attempted to console a family that had lost 5 sons in battle during the Civil War. But he captured the essence of the loss as he wrote, "I feel how weak and fruitless must be any word of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the loss, the grief of a loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the republic they died to save. I pray our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, Abraham Lincoln. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today the House will consider H.R. 822, a long overdue measure to assure that states recognize the concealed weapons permits issued by other states. This very simple measure has unleashed a firestorm of protests from the political left. I noted one polemicist who obviously has not read the Constitution wax eloquently of the constitutional violation of states' rights enshrined in the 10th Amendment. What nonsense. Article 4 of the Constitution could not possibly be more clear. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. It is precisely this article that requires one state to recognize driver's licenses or birth certificates or arrest warrants issued by another state. Without it, we are not a union, but merely a loose confederation. Well, then we're told this is dangerous and risky to allow honest and law-abiding citizens to exercise their lawfully issued permits in other states. Well, upon what basis do they make this claim? Certainly not upon any empirical data. The impact of right-to-carry laws, that is, laws that require the issuance of a concealed weapon permit to any law-abiding citizen, has been studied extensively, and the vast preponderance find that the crime rates have fallen in those states after they have adopted such laws. No credible study has ever found that the enactment of such laws has produced an increase in crimes or suicides or accidental deaths. Overall, states with right-to-carry laws have 22% lower violent crime rates, 30% lower murder rates, 46% lower robbery rates, and 12% lower aggravated assault rates as compared to the rest of the country. Indeed, right-to-carry laws have been so successful that no state has ever rescinded one. Well, so if the left can't make a rational case on constitutional grounds or on empirical grounds, what is the problem? Now, I suspect it comes down to what Ronald Reagan once called this irreconcilable conflict between those who believe in the sanctity of individual freedom and those who believe in the supremacy of the state. Years ago, I had the honor to work for the legendary chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, Ed Davis. During his 8.5 years as chief of the LAPD, crime dropped in Los Angeles, even while during the same period across the rest of the nation it was ballooning by more than 50%. Chief Davis founded Neighborhood Watch. He was an ardent opponent of laws that restrict ownership of firearms by honest citizens. His successful philosophy was predicated on the principle that, as he put it, it's not the responsibility of the police department to enforce the law. That is the job of every citizen. The police department is there to help. As citizens, we're an integral part of the laws that we enact. That doesn't mean we act as vigilantes, but it does mean that each of us has an inalienable right to defend ourselves and our families from violent predators with whatever force is necessary. And if we see a child being molested or a woman being robbed or an old man being beaten, we have a moral responsibility to intervene to the extent that we can. A concealed weapon in the hands of honest and law-abiding citizens makes us all safer. Simply knowing that there are responsible citizens amongst us capable of responding with force is itself a powerful deterrent to crime. That's the well-documented experience of every state with a right to carry law. But a society in which honest and law-abiding citizens are disarmed by their government is a society in which the gunman is king. This is a truth that ought to be self-evident, but it's lost at the altar of the authoritarian left, which seeks to concentrate all power in government at the expense of the people. Perhaps the best test of the self-evident nature of that truth is illustrated in a full-page newspaper ad I once saw that offered a cutout sign which in 150-point type said, "There are no guns in this house." The caption under it asked, "Would you post this sign in your front window?" I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes at this time the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to urge and implore my colleagues to support the Stock Act, the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. I asked also that Speaker Boehner bring this bill to the floor for a vote immediately. On Sunday night on CBS, their news program 60 Minutes highlighted a potential problem of insider trading on Capitol Hill. Unlike all other Americans and investors, members of Congress and their staff are not held legally responsible for profiting from non-public information they gain from their official positions serving the public. This is absolutely outrageous and strikes at the heart of the democracy. When I first came to Congress and sat down with the author of this bill originally, Congressman Bayard, and he started explaining to me what this was about, I, as most Americans, was shocked to believe it wasn't already a bill. Why would you allow the breach of trust of the American public to believe that their member of Congress could potentially be trading on information to enrich themselves? It's not the point of is it happening. The point is if the potential lies there. At the heart of every relationship is trust. If the trust is violated, everything that comes after that is a moot point. At a time, and this might be the greatest understatement ever, the American public is understandably frustrated with all the bickering and gridlock here. They don't trust institutions. They don't trust their banker. They don't trust corporations. They don't trust Congress. If you thought we couldn't go any lower than a 9% approval rating, just have your people who watch 60 Minutes vote now and see where they're at. This legislation is a very big step in the right direction. It's about restoring the faith and trust in Congress and the work of democracy. Ronald Reagan was right. We've heard about President Reagan several times today. Trust, but verify. That's what this piece of legislation is about. We want to work with Speaker Boehner, get this bill moving. And let me tell you, it's very simple on what it does. The bill would prohibit insider trading on Capitol Hill. It will remove loophole and any confusion about what's right, wrong, legal, or illegal. No insider trading by members of Congress and their staff, period. If you do it, you break the law, you'll be held accountable. It's common sense. The Stock Act would prohibit congressional staff from using non-public information obtained through their official duties for personal gain in stocks in the commodities market. It would also prohibit individuals and firms who attempt to mine such information from public officials to use it for insider trading. Specifically, the bill is simple and short and says this: requires that the SEC and the CFTC write rules that ban using congressional, non-public information to make trades. Changes the health ethic rules to specifically ban members and staff from using non-public information to make trades. Change House disclosure rules to require members and staff who already file financial disclosures to disclose trades of $1,000 or more in a more timely fashion, in addition to the annual disclosures. And it requires political intelligence firms to register like lobbyists. These are people who come to the Hill, use their connections, talk to people, try and understand what piece of legislation is moving, what's the potential for a potential government contract, and then they go back, sell that information that's given to investors. That breach of trust, that potential to undermine our financial systems is a cancer on the system. It weighs on the American public's trust of their finance, of corporations, of Congress, and undermines the democracy. These people can still come here, but register just like lobbyists. Make sure that transparency and the disinfectant of sunshine shines on this. There is no room in this institution for even the perception of wrongdoing. Every member of Congress must be held to a higher standard. It does not infringe upon their rights to legally trade. It doesn't infringe upon their rights, their American rights, to work hard, be smart, make good investments, and profit from that. What it does prohibit is an unfair playing field that penalizes those that play by the rules. And like so many of my colleagues and millions of middle-class Americans, I myself, a public school teacher, spent 24 years in the National Guard. I tried to do what was right by my family and my neighbors. I tried to play by the rules with the great understanding that the American dream was you play by the rules, you work hard, you will benefit for that. This piece of legislation ensures that the American people know that we, as their representatives in this sacred House of the people, are playing by the exact same rules, not worrying about enriching ourselves, not worrying about gaming the system, and making sure that their needs are put first. And as I said, it's not whether it happens or not. It's whether the perception is there. I urge my colleagues and Speaker Boehner, move this to the floor and let's vote for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Turner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tragedy of the Holocaust is etched deep within our minds. All of us have heard the stories of human experiments, tortures, and mass execution. As the entrance of the Holocaust Museum here in Washington says, "Never again," and others have said, "Never forget." Sadly, we are provided with a powerful reminder this past week in my district that anti-Semitism is very much in our midst. 73 years later to the day, the events of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, were replayed in my district. Cars were burned and anti-Semitic scrawlings left on property. Today, we know the consequences of inaction. As was true then as it is today, we know that hatred is out there, and we are all too familiar with its ability to spread like a cancer. 10 million people died at the hands of the Nazis, including 6 million Jews. This indiscriminate murder is beyond comprehension. It is unfathomable. And while Hitler and his Nazi henchmen coordinated this horrific event, they were not alone, and others who aided, abetted, and profited from this crime should be held accountable. This morning I will be joining my colleague, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who is holding a hearing on 2 important pieces of legislation which would make and hold accountable those entities that aided in the Holocaust. The Holocaust Rail Justice Act would make the French-owned rail company, SNCF, which transported Jews in appalling conditions from France to Germany, liable for damages. I am proud to be co-sponsor of this bill. For a generation, Holocaust victims and survivors have been denied justice through a legal loophole barring lawsuits against sovereign entities. The rail company, SNCF, has hidden behind this legal veil as a way to escape liability, even though SNCF's trains, tracks, and employees were used. There's no excuse for any person or entity that played any role in the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials make clear it is not enough that we were following orders. It is not enough today to say that SNCF did not engineer the atrocities. SNCF facilitated it, and they should be held accountable for their part. Chairman Ros-Lehtinen has introduced another measure which would enable Holocaust survivors and heirs and beneficiaries of Holocaust victims to obtain compensation from insurance companies and policies which were taken by Nazi-run governments. This bill would provide a legal forum for victims to have their claims heard, which is small compensation for the atrocities of the Holocaust, so that the words "never again" are more than just words. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes. Without objection. So ordered.
Mr. Speaker, on November 28th, a new federal courthouse will open in western New York. Located on historic Niagara Square in Buffalo's Central Business District, the 10-story structure will be home to the United States Court for the Western District of New York. The striking profile of the courthouse is a reminder that Buffalo's future is connected to its unique architectural heritage. As we draw inspiration for our future from this impressive building, I can think of no name more fitting to grace it than one from our past, that of Western New York's only Supreme Court Justice, Robert H. Jackson. Jackson was born and raised near Jamestown, New York. He spent the first 42 years of his life in Western New York and for a time lived on Johnson Park, which is in the shadow of the new courthouse, and he practiced law at the historic Ellicott Square building in downtown Buffalo. He was a prominent local attorney, and in 1934, President Roosevelt called him to public service in Washington. After stints as Assistant Attorney General for Tax and Antitrust, Jackson was appointed U.S. Solicitor General. He personally argued more than 30 cases before the Supreme Court on which he would later sit. Louis Brandeis, who was Supreme Court Justice at the time, said of Jackson that he was so good he should be Solicitor General for life. But Jackson was soon tapped to head the Justice Department as the United States Attorney General. He was instrumental in helping President Roosevelt formulate America's national security policies as the United States headed toward inevitable involvement in World War II. In 1941, Roosevelt appointed Jackson to the United States Supreme Court. He remains to this day the only Supreme Court justice from Western New York. He served on the court for 13 terms and took part in several important decisions, none bigger than the landmark Brown v. Board of Education, which prohibited segregation. Justice Jackson was known on the court for personally authoring thoughtful and compelling opinions. The leading constitutional scholar, Lawrence Tribe, called Jackson the most piercingly eloquent writer ever to serve on the United States Supreme Court. In 1945, President Truman asked Johnson to take a leave from the court to serve as the United States Chief Prosecutor at the International Military Tribunal, the Nuremberg trials. Jackson was the Chief Prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals and was responsible for achieving consensus among the Allies on the design and implementation of the trials. Some believe that the year Jackson spent away from the court cost him a chance of being elevated to Chief Justice. But Jackson argued that Nuremberg was the most important work of his life. True to his Western New York roots, immediately upon returning from Europe, Jackson took a train to Buffalo to address the University of Buffalo's centennial. He spoke eloquently of the subjects of war, international law, and the need for countries to work together for peace. Robert Jackson died in 1954 and is buried at Maple Grove Cemetery in Frewsburg, New York, not far from his childhood home. The federal judges, the United States Attorney of the Western District of New York, have endorsed the naming of the courthouse in Jackson's honor. Chief Judge William Scretany called him the most distinguished jurist and most acclaimed legal mind to come out of Western New York. And Senior Judge John Curtin said of Jackson, "I think we should pick someone from the court family in Western New York. I can't think of a better choice." Mr. Speaker, Justice Jackson's story is uniquely American, and it's uniquely Western New York. I will soon introduce legislation to name our new courthouse for Robert H. Jackson, and I invite my colleagues to join to support this effort. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, before spending last weekend in Hawaii and now jetting off to Australia and Indonesia, President Obama was crisscrossing our country on his We Can't Wait for Congress to Act tour. Along the way, he found the time to issue executive orders that circumvent the will of Congress. His justification for this end run around Congress? America can't wait for Congress to act to create jobs. If our President was really interested in creating jobs, he would not have caved in to election year politics, which is precisely what he did last Friday when he punted on approval of the proposed Keystone XL pipeline until well after next fall's election. When completed, the Keystone XL pipeline will bring nearly 1 million barrels of oil per day to the United States from Canada. Support for this pipeline is wide and varied, including major United States labor unions who understand the project will create thousands of American jobs and reduce our reliance on Middle Eastern oil. We'll have greater energy security, which means greater national security. That's a win, 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 win for America. There is no dispute that building a pipeline will create 20,000 direct American construction jobs and spin off over 100,000 indirect jobs in the good old USA. Unfortunately, the President is putting personal political needs before the needs of out-of-work Americans. He's blowing an opportunity to ensure a stable energy supply from a country that likes us while creating jobs right here in America. The Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department have spent extensive time reviewing the impact of this pipeline. Early proposals were revised to address EPA and stakeholder concerns. After years of study, a decision was supposed to be made this fall by President Obama. Apparently, it was a tough decision for our President. He had to choose between two groups within his political base: labor unions and jobs, environmental activists and no jobs. There are times when the American people expect leadership which requires making tough decisions. Regrettably, last Friday, our President caved in to the environmental and Hollywood activists as they surrounded the White House in opposition to the Keystone Pipeline. He chose to postpone a final decision on the Keystone XL pipeline until January of 2013. His reason? The administration needed to consider alternative routes for the pipeline that avoided aquifers in Nebraska. But the saga doesn't end there. Yesterday, TransCanada, the builder of the pipeline, directly addressed the President Obama's concerns by announcing they would reroute the pipeline to avoid the Nebraska aquifers. Problem solved. American people win, right? No. It took a few hours for the administration to announce that the goalposts were being moved again. Despite proposing a solution to the President's concerns, the administration announced that a final decision would not come until after the presidential election in 2012. The bottom line? Presidential politics trumped what's best for a nation struggling to recover from the worst recession in our history. America needs a thoughtful leader who places the needs of country over politics. Canada has an abundance of energy they want to sell us, but they won't wait forever, and China is a ready customer. Canadian Prime Minister Harper recently indicated that with this unnecessary delay, Canada must increase its efforts to find a partner to ensure it can supply energy outside the United States and into Asia in particular. This pipeline will help American families today. We need these jobs today. We need this pipeline today. The Chicago Bears need a punter. The American people need a leader. President Obama should be that leader and approve this pipeline today. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in the waning months of the Clinton administration, Jason Seligman, a government economist, produced a memo for the White House that speculated on what the effects would be if the United States paid off its national debt by 2012, as many were predicting at the time. The memo, which was obtained by NPR under a Freedom of Information Act, was never released publicly, and the events of the intervening years have rendered it nothing more than historical curiosity. But its mere existence is both a stark reminder of what might have been and an acknowledgement that the great majority of the current debt was built up during the last administration. In late 2000, no one could have foreseen the 9/11 attacks or the wars that would follow. These certainly contributed to the red ink, but profligacy, poor strategic choices, and political positioning are the real drivers of our burgeoning budget, which was under $6 trillion at the time of President Clinton leaving office, but is now nearly $15 trillion. And in a real estate bubble fueled by too easy credit and an economy that was no longer focused on creating and making things here in America, and the challenge facing us comes into even more clear focus. In 1 week, the bicameral supercommittee is due to present its plan to Congress to rein in our out-of-control finances and restore responsible stewardship of our economy that prevailed at the end of the Clinton administration, when government ran surpluses for 4 straight years. A mere month after the supercommittee presents its plan, just before Christmas, we will either bless its work or face the real prospect of painful across-the-board cuts beginning in 2013. I have long supported a realistic approach and urged the supercommittee to go big and consider the full range of government spending in making cuts. However, I also know that we cannot put our fiscal house in order solely through spending cuts, and that the government is going to have to find a way to increase the revenue flowing into the Federal Treasury. While the choices we will confront in the next few weeks will be difficult, they're only the beginning of a process that must result in a new economic paradigm that will guide Congress and the administration in the coming years, when we'll be forced to adjust to a much more competitive global environment, even as we work to put the economic downturn of the past 3 years behind us. As the current wave of pessimism surrounding the work of the supercommittee demonstrates, this will not be an easy task, nor will it be accomplished quickly. If we are to succeed, and success is an absolute imperative, I believe that we'll need a new set of long-term strategies and policies to accomplish 5 principles. First, the U.S. is going to have to become a manufacturer again. We should be proud of the many of the world's iconic consumer products, like Apple iPhones, for example, were designed and developed here. But much of the benefit to our economy is lost because these products are too often manufactured overseas. American workers are not benefiting from the manufacture of Apple's category-leading smartphone. We need to return to an economy where American workers are involved in the full life cycle of a product, from concept through design and testing and on to manufacture and marketing. To do that, I believe that we need to inject some certainty into our corporate tax structure, as well as creating a regulatory structure that protects workers, consumers, and the environment, but not in a way that is arbitrary or capricious. Second, we need to ensure that small business remains the catalyst for the American economy. Capitalism, by its very nature, is highly competitive, and most new businesses fail. While government cannot change that central truth about a market economy, we can foster a climate that makes it easier to succeed by ensuring access to capital, targeted tax incentives, by creating a supportive infrastructure, and devising a regulatory framework that offers American business the best chance of success. Third, we are in a global war for talent, and we must reorient our immigration structure to attract the most promising people from around the world. It is no longer a given that a young Indian or Chinese entrepreneur will want to move to the U.S. if given the chance. Combined with a disquieting trend that American universities are not producing enough homegrown talent in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we face a daunting challenge. In coming days, I'll be introducing legislation that will make it easier for foreign-born graduates in select STEM fields to stay in this country by starting a new business here and hiring American workers. Fourth, America cannot compete with the developing world in terms of wages, but a highly skilled workforce buttressed by a revitalized world-class infrastructure that reduces the time and expense of getting goods to market and fosters innovation will keep us competitive. That's why I support investments in infrastructure and education that will lay the groundwork for a newly competitive America while addressing the current unemployment problem acting as a drag on our economy. Working together on these objectives, we can restore the middle-class dream that hard work and perseverance will give the average American the chance to live comfortably. As President Clinton once observed, there's nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the time to talk about something near and dear to my heart, families. This week is National Adoption Week, and as an adoptive parent of 2 wonderful boys, my wife Kathy, I know how blessed an adoptive family is. Will, our 13-year-old, and Sean, who will tell you he's almost 10, are the light of our lives. They're the gifts that give our lives a purpose and a joy we never knew before. It's a privilege for me to serve the people of the 8th District of Texas, but it is my highest privilege to be called Dad, because two women in two difficult circumstances in two different states made the difficult but life-changing choice to give Kathy and I the greatest gift of all, of family. This weekend marks the 12th annual National Adoption Day, where judges will open their courts for very special cases, and tens of thousands of children become a part of these forever families. In my home state of Texas, there are nearly 30,000 children in foster care, and half of them could be adopted tomorrow. I hope that every American who has ever thought about sharing their blessings with a child thinks about these children who just want a seat at a Thanksgiving table they can call their own. I ask every American, do you have room for one more at your table? If just 1 in 500 of the Americans who were polled recently and said they'd be open to adopting a foster child did so, no foster child would only have the dreams of a forever family. They would have that seat at the Thanksgiving Day table. Right now, the average wait for a foster child to find a forever family is over 2.5 years. To a child, that seems like forever, and thousands age out of the system every year, never having found a home. In the greatest nation on God's green earth, we can do better by these kids, one by one, town by town. A loving, forever family and home not only makes a powerful difference in the lives of these children, I can promise you the joy and love you'll get back will change your family. Being an adoptive parent is a gift. Every day is a present. The love you share comes back to you because adoptions make families. It made mine. Maybe it can make yours as well. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Roybal Allard, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize an event of critical importance to all current and future childbearing families in this country. For 3 days in October, a national summit of maternity care stakeholders met in Warrenton, Virginia, to discuss the status of home birth within the greater context of maternity care in the United States. That meeting marked the first time a multidisciplinary group of maternity care providers, consumers, and industry leaders came together to determine what the U.S. maternity care system could do to make home birth the safest and most positive experience possible for moms and babies. Given the significant controversy over the appropriateness of home birth within the groups represented at the summit, the fact that this conversation took place at all is historic. The goal of the meeting was not to debate the rightness or wrongness of home birth, but rather to discuss the support, care, consultation, collaboration, and referrals necessary to protect moms and babies in all birth settings. According to CDC's most recent figures, in 2008, approximately 28,500 home births took place in the United States. While this number represents less than 1% of all births in our country, the last available statistics tell us that between 2004 and 2008, the number of women giving birth at home increased by 22%. Without compromising quality of care, women want and expect to have choices for childbirth, including birth setting. Women and families are ill-served when maternity care professionals allow conflict between disciplines to supersede collaboration. The safety of birth in all settings must be the utmost priority. The delegates who met in Virginia were charged with finding common ground to move the issue of safe home birth beyond professional differences and toward consensus building. The result of their effort was a consensus document released in November 1st of this year. This important document sets out 9 essential statements of agreement about the ideal system to promote the safest and most positive birth outcomes across all birth settings. While I will be submitting the entire document into the record, I want to highlight the following key points agreed upon by all the delegates at the summit. First, all childbearing women in all maternity care settings should receive respectful, women-centered care, including opportunities for shared decision-making to help each woman make the choices that are right for her. Second, physiological birth is valuable for women, babies, families, and society, and appropriate intervention should be based on the best available evidence to achieve optimal outcomes for mothers and babies. Third, collaboration within an integrated maternity care system is essential for optimal outcomes. And when necessary, all women and families planning a birth center at home have a right to a respectful, safe, and seamless consultation, referral, transport, and transfer of care. Fourth, all health professionals who provide maternity care in all settings should have a license that is based on national certification that includes defined competencies and standards for education and practice. And fifth, in order to foster effective communication and collaboration across all maternity disciplines, all students and practitioners involved in maternity and newborn care must learn about each other's disciplines and maternity care in all settings. Additionally, the consensus document calls for medical liability system reform, a compulsory process for the collection of patient data into all birth settings, the elimination of disparities of care, and increased consumer participation. The Home Birth Consensus Summit document is an important first step in protecting and supporting all childbearing families across all birth settings. But the discussion must not stop there. I encourage all professional organizations representing providers of maternity care and newborn care and all childbirth advocacy groups to affirm the consensus statement and commit to working together towards its realization. Mothers and babies in this country deserve nothing less. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes at this time the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to a great American who passed away last week, my friend Mel Hancock. Mel served in this body from 1989 to 1997. He could have been easily reelected, but he had pledged to serve only 8 years, and he kept his word. Mel served the people of southwest Missouri with great honor and distinction. He was one of the most down-to-earth people ever to sit in Congress, and I can assure everyone that Washington never changed Mel Hancock one bit. He was one of the most conservative members here, and if everyone had voted as he did, we certainly would not be in the astounding hole we are in today. Mel was a very successful small businessman. Early in his career, he was a salesman for International Harvester and actually lived in my hometown of Knoxville for a year and a half in 1954 and 55. I told him once I was glad he moved back to Missouri so I could be in Congress. Of course, it was 33 years later when we both first ran. Mel was 59 when first elected and was the oldest freshman of those who were elected in 1988. All the new members very quickly grew to respect and look up to him. In Missouri, Mel had started a business installing security cameras in banks. He started with very little, worked very long hours, and saw the American dream come true in his own life. He saw that as government grew bigger and bigger, it took away more and more of our freedom and really hurt the middle class and those in small business. He believed that big government really helped only those who worked for the government and very wealthy big government contractors. So he took on the establishment in Missouri with what came to be called the Hancock Amendment. This was an amendment to limit property taxes, and he really just started out as one man taking on the government and its contractors. But he won, and Missouri was a better place for it. The people had more control over their own money. One quick story. I doubt that Mel hardly ever went to a movie, but one night he and I were invited to the world premiere of Air Force One, a movie starring Harrison Ford. It was a Hollywood-type opening with bright lights and a long red carpet. Most people came in tuxedos and long dresses, many in limousines. At that time, because I did not drive long distances in Washington, I drove a very cheap chocolate brown K car that I had bought used from a rental company. The passenger door made a horrible, very loud sound when it opened. I do not believe I ever saw Mel laugh as hard as when the attendant opened his door of that little brown car, making the loud noise so Mel and I could walk in our very ordinary suits down that long red carpet. He loved the fact that we were among the very few who had not come in tuxedos and limousines. There's an old saying about being country before country was cool. That was Mel. Mel was possibly the first Tea Party person in the best sense of those words many years before there was the Tea Party of today. Mel ran for Congress on the slogan of "Give 'em Mel." When he won, he became a gift to this nation and to his people. Mel was assigned to the very prestigious Ways and Means Committee. Most former members of that committee become lobbyists or highly paid consultants. But it was no surprise to me that when he left, he went home to be with his family and the people of Missouri and never came back. He was a kind, honest, hard-working American who helped thousands of people. Mel Hancock loved his wife Shug and his children, and he loved his country. He made this nation a better place by all that he did in his good life. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, America continues to be the land of the free because America continues to be the home of the brave. I think it most appropriate that this House take up legislation today that will include the Hiring Heroes Act. This legislation is exceedingly important because our brave heroes, our troops, go to distant places and they risk their limbs and their lives to protect great and noble American ideals. They do not ask why. When the clarion call comes, they respond by going to their various assignments and doing their jobs. When they leave home, they many times will leave home a wife that is with child. Many of their children are born while they are in distant places protecting our great and noble American ideals. They will leave behind them children who are about to take their first steps. They never get to see the first step or hear the first word spoken. When a veteran goes to war, when a troop goes to war, that troop has that family with him or her. A family goes to war not directly but always indirectly with the troop that goes to war. And they do their jobs. They have done their job in Afghanistan. They have done their jobs in Iraq. And they will continue to do their jobs. But it is sad to note that of those veterans who have done their jobs in Iraq and Afghanistan, 12.1% of them are unemployed. This is not a partisan issue. This issue transcends the lines that generally separate us. If they can go to distant places and risk their limbs and their lives for us to do their jobs for us, we have to provide jobs for them when they come home. This is about doing the right thing for people who answer the clarion call to serve without hesitation, reservation, or equivocation. They merit jobs when they come home. This is why I'm proud that this House will take up legislation that will accord tax credits to businesses that hire our veterans. If a business hires a veteran that has been unemployed for 4 weeks, there's a $2,400 tax credit available. If that veteran has been unemployed for 6 months, there is a $5,600 tax credit that's available. If the unemployed veteran has been employed for 6 months and has a service-connected disability, there is a $9,600 tax credit available to the business. This is the business of America, putting our veterans to work. This piece of legislation merits our consideration for other reasons as well. The legislation will allow approximately 100,000 veterans of wars of other eras to be helped with job training and other programs. This piece of legislation is the least a grateful nation can do for those who answer the clarion call to serve in distant places. I'm honored to say I will vote for the legislation. I believe in our country. I believe in the American service people, the troops that go to distant places. I want to make sure that they have every opportunity to recapture what they have lost when they have left their homes, left their jobs for years on end. If they can leave their jobs here and make sacrifices for us, we've got to make sacrifices here so that they can have jobs when they return home. America will continue to be the land of the free as long as we continue to make sure that we have jobs for those who are brave enough to serve us in distant places. God bless America, God bless our troops, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Neugebauer, for 5 minutes.